Happiness is not purely emotional. It's biological. And when it begins with how your brain and body interact with the environment across a 24-hour cycle. The most foundational pillar for stable and happy brain are sleep, sunlight, and movement. These are not just wellness buzzwords, and they are non-negotiable neurobiological levers that determine how well your nervous system functions. Sleep is the first domino in the chain, and the brain is an energy-intensive organ, and during deep sleep, particularly during slow wave and REM phases, it performs vital housekeeping functions, like lymphatic clearance, where metabolic waste is flushed out of neural tissue. Without this process, and the brain becomes physiologically clogged, impairing mood regulation, memory consolidation, and emotional resilience. Sleep also recalibrates your sensitivity to dopamine, which directly affects your ability to feel pleasure and stay motivated. And when sleep is insufficient, the amygdala becomes hyperreactive, meaning you're more emotionally volatile, less focused, and when more likely to perceive neutral stimuli as threatening. It's not about sleeping more. It's about sleeping consistently and aligning it with your circadian biology. The circadian system, in fact, is anchored by one main environmental cue, light. Specifically, a natural sunlight entering the eyes early in the day is essential for sensing your internal clock. When photons from the sun hit specialized retinal ganglion cells, and they trigger a cascade that increases cortisol output, not in the stress-related sense, but in the wakefulness-promoting, alertness-enhancing sense. And that cortisol peak, in turn, sets a timer for the release of melatonin 1/1206 16 hours later, helping you wind down at night. When you do consistently, if you miss this morning light exposure or substitute it with indoor lighting or screen use, your internal clock becomes misaligned. This misalignment leads to mood instability, poor sleep quality, and lower baseline dopamine levels. Just one consistently 15 minutes of natural light exposure within an hour of waking can reset your system and drive a biological rhythm that supports stable energy and mood and focus throughout the day. Then comes movement, not just as exercise, but as a signaling tool. And locomotion activates neural circuits that overlap with those responsible for focus, mood, and motivation. Physical movement, especially rhythmic, aerobic movement, increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, which acts like Miracle-Gro for the brain. BNF enhances synaptic plasticity, improving learning and memory, and when you do consistently. And it also plays a critical role in regulating mood by supporting the growth and maintenance of neurons in areas like the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex. And when these regions are directly involved in emotional regulation and decision-making, and even low-intensity movement like walking can shift your autonomic nervous system into a parasympathetic state and reducing anxiety and elevating serotonin levels. These three, sleep, sunlight, and movement, work synergistically. They are biological switches and not optional habits. If you want a happier brain, you must first create the conditions in which the brain can function well. Your mood is not just in your mind, it's built from what you do with your body every single day. Dopamine is often misunderstood as simply the molecule of pleasure, but in reality, it is far more fundamental. It is the molecule of motivation, drive, and future-oriented behavior. It determines how much energy you're willing to expend for a reward, how you prioritize tasks, and when you do consistently, even how you perceive the value of effort. And here's the core principle: dopamine that you generate internally through effort and focus is not only more sustainable, but also trains your nervous system for long-term resilience and satisfaction. When you rely on external rewards, like when you validation, junk food, entertainment, you are essentially borrowing dopamine. These stimuli spike it sharply but briefly. And when you do consistently, due to a process called receptor downregulation, your baseline dopamine level dips below where it started. This creates a crash, fatigue, low motivation, irritability. Over time, the nervous system begins to demand more of the same stimulus just to return to the same feeling. It's the biochemical foundation of burnout and addiction. But when you reward the process, not the outcome, when you tell yourself, then this is hard and I'm doing it anyway, you activate dopamine circuits in a completely different way. And when you do consistently, you're not waiting for something external to make you feel good. You're teaching your system to associate effort with reward. This is called dopaminergic self-regulation. It builds what's known as tonic dopamine, your baseline level, in which is what determines your day-to-day motivation. High spikes feel great, but a high baseline is what keeps you going. This isn't abstract. It's measurable at the level of neuronal firing in the ventral tegmental area, VTA. And when you do projects to the nucleus accumbens and prefrontal cortex, regions responsible for motivation, planning, and reward prediction. And when you engage in effort and then mentally reinforce that effort with intentional self-talk or visualization. I showed up, I did the work, and that matters. You strengthen the wiring between the effort and reward circuits. Over time, this becomes a closed loop. And when you do consistently, you feel good because you tried, not because something happened to you. That's why practices like learning, cold exposure, or training sessions, things that require willpower, feel more satisfying when you anchor your focus on the process. The key isn't suppress pleasure or eliminate rewards. It's to shift the source of satisfaction from passive to active, from do consistently, from outcome to engagement, because when you build a brain that loves the effort, you become immune to distraction and discouragement. And when you do consistently, internally generated dopamine creates durable circuits. It doesn't just elevate mood, it rewires your perception of what's worth doing. It trains you to pursue long-term goals without being derailed by short-term cravings. And most importantly, consistently, it gives you sovereignty over your emotional state. You're no longer at the mercy of the environment. You're generating your own fuel and your own drive from within. That's what creates lasting happiness, not spikes, but stability, not hype, but habit. And human beings are biologically wired for connection. This isn't just a social or emotional idea. It's a deeply neurochemical reality. Even minimal, but emotionally meaningful relationships profoundly shape the way your brain and body function. And when we talk about happiness or emotional well-being, we cannot ignore the neurobiology of social interaction. Relationships are not a luxury. They are essential tools for regulating stress, stabilizing mood, and even extending lifespan at the physiological level. When meaningful social interactions trigger the release of oxytocin, a peptide hormone that acts both centrally in the brain and peripherally in the body. Oxytocin does more than create feelings of bonding. It lowers cortisol levels, reduces systemic inflammation, and enhances parasympathetic tone. This means your body literally enters a calmer, more restorative state in the presence of someone you trust or feel emotionally safe with. What's fascinating is that this doesn't require a large social circle. Just 2 or 3 emotionally supportive relationships are enough to produce measurable changes in autonomic nervous system activity. And a warm conversation, eye contact, shared laughter. These subtle moments cue your brain that you're not alone, which downregulates the threat detection circuits in the amygdala. The result is a nervous system that feels safer, more stable, and when better able to handle challenges. From a neurochemical standpoint, positive social connection enhances dopamine and serotonin levels. And when you do consistently, both which are central to mood regulation, it also modulates the release of endogenous opiates, your body's natural painkillers. That's why loneliness doesn't feel bad psychologically. It has physical consequences. And when you chronic social isolation elevates markers inflammation, increases risk for cardiovascular disease, and accelerates cognitive decline. And when you do consistently, it's not just that relationships make us feel better. They literally change the chemical environment inside our bodies. When there's also a bidirectional effect, when we feel emotionally supported, we make better decisions, engage in healthier behaviors. When you consistently and are more likely to pursue goals with persistence, that behavior in turn strengthens those very relationships. It becomes a feedback loop, neurobiology reinforcing behavior and behavior reinforcing neurobiology. The key is emotional depth, not quantity. A single genuine conversation where you feel seen or understood has more impact on your physiology than 100 superficial interactions. This is because emotional resonance activates mirror neurons in deep limbic structures that signal connection, safety, and relevance. So if you're looking to build a happier, more balanced life, don't overlook the power of meaningful human connection. Constantly, it's not about becoming more social. It's about becoming more selective and present. And relationships that matter train your nervous system to stay regulated, your hormones to stay balanced, and your perspective to stay grounded. And in a world of digital overstimulation and hyperindividualism, the simplest and most biology-aligned intervention for sustained emotional well-being might just be having a real conversation with someone who truly listens. And your nervous system is not fixed. It's highly adaptable. It constantly rewires itself in response to the signals you feed it. And whether you're conscious of them or not, one of the most powerful ways to train your system toward resilience and happiness is through deliberate stress combined with structured, goal-directed behavior. This is how you regain control, not just psychologically, but at the level of your neurobiology. Let's start with stress. And not all stress is harmful. In fact, short, controlled exposures to stress, whether it's cold, heat, fasting, high-intensity training, or even public speaking, activate circuits that sharpen focus, elevate norepinephrine and dopamine, and strengthen the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is the executive center of the brain responsible for planning, inhibition, and decision-making. And when you do consistently, when you deliberately expose yourself to stress in a controlled environment, you're teaching this area of the brain that it can regulate fear, anxiety, and reactivity. This is called top-down control. It turns the brain from a reactive system into a responsive system. In other words, and when you do consistently, when you put yourself into a difficult but manageable situation on purpose and get through it, you build what's known as stress inoculation. You do consistently, and you're not avoiding discomfort, you're choosing it, and that simple shift changes everything. It creates predictability around stress, and when you consist is one of the key drivers of whether a stressor becomes traumatic or transformative. The nervous system thrives on predictability, and voluntary stress is predictable stress. That means your system learns it can survive, adapt, and even grow from challenges. Now, combine that with structured goals, short-term objectives tied to long-term vision. Goal pursuit activates the mesolimbic dopamine system. Win isn't just responsible for reward, but for effort allocation. The clearer the goal, and the more efficiently your nervous system can deploy attention and energy toward it. Goals give the brain a framework for meaning. Without goals, the default mode network becomes dominant. This is the brain's idle state, which often leads to rumination, anxiety, and a sense of purposelessness. But with a structured goal, especially one broken down into manageable, actionable steps, you activate a completely different network. You do consistently. You engage the task positive network, which synchronize attention, motor planning, and time perception. The result, you feel more present and more competent, more focused. You experience progress as a biological reward. Dopamine is released not only when you hit the goal, but during the pursuit, especially when you recognize that progress is being made. When deliberate stress and structured goals are used in tandem, then your nervous system becomes more efficient, more regulated, and more resilient. You stop reacting emotionally to every challenge and start responding with intention. And when you do consistently, you feel less overwhelmed because your brain is tracking direction, not just pressure. This isn't about forcing yourself to suffer. And when you do consistently, it's about creating micro environments where you learn that stress is not the enemy, it's the teacher. And when goals are not just targets, they're tools to tune the nervous system toward engagement, confidence, and control. And when your system learns to thrive under pressure, happiness stops being circumstantial and starts becoming internal. Gratitude, nutrition, and when attention control aren't abstract wellness trends, they are powerful biochemical levers that directly affect your emotional state and your energy levels and the way your nervous system responds to life. These aren't soft skills. They are hard science. And when you practiced consistently, they become tools to recalibrate your internal environment in ways that are both immediate and long-lasting. Let's start with gratitude. And when you practice gratitude in a very specific way, by recalling a meaningful moment where it did something for you that had emotional impact, you activate a set of circuits involving the prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate and the periaqueductal gray. These areas regulate empathy, decision-making, and pain modulation. That's why gratitude, when done with emotional depth, is not just a pleasant feeling. It shifts the neurochemical landscape. It increases baseline dopamine and serotonin, lowers levels of cortisol, and enhances vagal tone, which signals to your body that it's safe to relax and heal. And gratitude reduces inflammation and activates parasympathetic response, grounding the nervous system into a calm yet alert state. And when this happens without any external event needing to change, the brain doesn't require new circumstances. It just needs a new pattern of focus. Next, nutrition. Your brain is 2% of your body weight, but uses over 20% of your energy. And it doesn't just need calories. It needs the right nutrients to synthesize neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, and GABA. And omega-3 fatty acids, especially DHA, are critical for neuron membrane function. Magnesium helps regulate NDA receptors, stabilizing mood and enhancing neuroplasticity. B vitamins support mitochondrial energy production, and gut health through probiotics and fiber-rich foods plays a massive role in producing short-chain fatty acids that impact brain inflammation. You do consistently. The gut-brain axis is a two-way highway, and your microbiome can either support or sabotage your mood based on what you feed it. If you want emotional stability, you need metabolic stability, and that starts with what's on your plate. Finally, attention management. What you focus on literally reshapes your brain. Attention is not neutral, it's biochemical. Sustained attention increases acetylcholine and norepinephrine in targeted brain areas, enhancing neuroplasticity and focus. And when uncontrolled attention, especially hijacked by constant novelty from screens, noise, or fragmented multitasking, trains your nervous system into a reactive, overstimulated state. Over time, this depletes dopamine and erodes your ability to engage in deep, fulfilling tasks. When you consistently learning to control where your attention goes. Through practices like timed focus sessions, visual anchoring, or even deliberate eye movement patterns reshapes your neurochemistry toward calm, engagement, and clarity. Gratitude anchors your mood. Nutrition fuels the machinery of your mind. Attention directs the energy of your brain. Together, and when you do consistently, they form a triad neurochemical toolkit for emotional resilience. When applied consistently, these tools don't just make you feel better, and they make your nervous system function better. And that's the key to lasting well-being, shifting from emotional reactivity to biochemical sovereignty, not by changing the world around you, but by mastering the systems within you. Happiness isn't accidental. It's the result of aligning daily behavior with the biology that governs your emotions, motivation, and resilience. Sleep, light, movement, relationships, effort-based dopamine, stress inoculation, focused goals, gratitude, nutrition, consistently, and attention control are not philosophical ideals. They're actionable, measurable inputs that shape the chemistry of your mind. When each one sends a clear signal to your nervous system about whether you are surviving or thriving. And when you do consistently, the path to a happier life isn't hidden in dramatic life overhauls or waiting for external circumstances to change. It's embedded in daily rituals, small, repeatable acts that recalibrate your neurochemistry from the inside out. And when you learn to manage these systems deliberately, you're no longer chasing happiness. You're building it, and once it's built on a biological foundation, it's far more stable, far more resilient, and when you can sleep, and far more within your control than you were ever led to believe.